Jesi milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems. Giants walking, angels and demons fight. Only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold. Mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold. From valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty. Study with us and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror. From dungeons and dragons to Skyrim and Mordor. From powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep on the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Myth, mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Blessed Friday, everyone. If you're new on the channel, you're wondering, well, how can theology in the Bible have any connections with cryptids and supernatural stuff? Well, it is because, thankfully to scholars and priests and pastors and theologians like Dr. Michael Heiser, who have reintroduced the spiritual and supernatural context to the scriptures, we're able to see these creatures, these beings, these supernatural events and eyewitness reports through new lenses, and again, very biblical. But because so many of these things are not black and white and they're not very easy to understand, and it's very unfair to overgeneralize or to say all of these events were either people's imagination or maybe they're under some influence, we have decided when we're starting this podcast to approach topics like this that not always churches or academia deal with through honest biblical lenses that is backed up with historical theology, systematic theology, biblical theology, ancient Near East, pop culture, and many other sources, including apocrypha books that didn't make it into the Bible, in order to better assess topics like tonight. About a month and a half ago, we have assessed one of the stories from a really good book called Real Monsters, Gruesome Creatures and Beasts from the Darkside, which was penned by Brad Steiger back in 2010. And you can buy yourself, this book. So about a month and a half, we covered this, one of the stories or one of the chapters that has to deal with lizard men. Tonight, we'll be talking about elves, we'll be talking about goblins, we'll be talking about fairies, we'll be talking about, I even forgot, creatures that are mostly associated with forest, and some of them, like mermaids and sirens, they're associated with water. Before we start talking about these things, Shaun, just as I was saying, for as a context for the new listeners and the new audience out there who may be like, "Oh, this is too fringe for me. I thought you guys are Christians." What would be a nice bridge to mention beyond historical theology, beyond the church founders, beyond scholars like Dr. Heiser, who are like, hey, there is view in Christian theology and in a life of a Christian, when we're talking about Mothman or Bigfoot, or we're talking about goblins and gremlins and all these ghosts and spirits, there is a way how to assess these things. So it's unfair to discard them. And even though some of this, yes, it could be exaggerated or even invented fairy tales and lies, but it's still, we as people involved in spiritual warfare, unwillingly or willingly, it is our duty to approach all these cases case by case honestly and see them through biblical lenses. So what will be your maybe message, or that, like I said, bridge between the Bible and all these fringe stories to new audience and new members?
Well, again, remember what we're going to be going over is a collated list of eyewitness testimonies, right? And so this is stuff that people saw, and so the author Brad got all of these things together, and maybe put it into a way that's more pleasant to the eyes, so you can actually read it, understand it, and follow it. But he's dealing with real testimonies of people who supposedly had encounters with these things, right? As Christians, the last thing that we want to do is just dismiss all encounters that a group of people are having, because that's one of the evidences that Paul points to for the resurrection of Jesus, is that there were 500 people who saw Jesus, right? So as Christians, the last thing that we want to do is say, well, you can't trust eyewitness testimony, right? So for us, that's one thing that we want to do. Another is, look, this isn't anything new. Go to some of the older cathedrals and you'll see the medieval Christians thought that these things really existed and even put them into their artwork. So this is just kind of reclaiming a Christian worldview that's much more than just Newtonian physics and mechanical causation. Like, we think that we live in a haunted world. We live in a world full of critters and creatures, because that's the way that God created it. How these spirits may appear to people, uh, we're going to be going through these, like Nico said, on a case by case basis. But in every situation, we're going to try to make an attempt to, look at it through the lens of Scripture, look at it using church fathers to see if they offer um, any sort of clarification on what people could be seeing. And so that's really going to be our heart for this, is as Christians, just kind of saying, hey, what have Christians said about these things? Because there is a long history of that.
I just want to say I really enjoyed while you were giving a very good argument. If we easily, as people of the book, as we are called many times, dismiss this, supernatural eyewitness reports, then how can we can go and believe those 500 eyewitness reports? They saw Jesus resurrected. It will be very biased and subjective. We will say, well, Shaun, or well, Nick, well, I mean, that's the Bible. Of course, we have to believe, but I mean, still, we weren't there. So there is some sort of trust that you have to put there. So it's like it would be unfair to dismiss millions of eyewitness, reports of people worldwide, witnessing on a daily basis when it comes to all these supernatural and fringe things. So yeah, for tonight, we'll be talking about goblins, gremlins, fairies, elves, Leshy, trolls, mermaids, and stuff like that. It's one of the chapters of this book. Again, the name of the book is provided, so do yourself a favor, support the author. By the way, the book got maximum reviews on Amazon, so it's a good one. So let's start talking about some of these creatures. In August 2009, Dominic Waghorn, Middle East correspondent for the World News, wrote that Israel was in the grips of mermaid fever after dozens of sightseeings of female figure in the Mediterranean Sea near Haifa. Council spokesman Nati Zilberman said that many people had cited the being all independent of one another. So supposedly multitudes of people saw the same thing. The mermaid was only seen in the evening, usually just at sunset, and had been drawing crowds of people with their cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of the nautical nymph and a photograph to prove her existence. So this is something like Nessie. Zilberman said that dozens of people who had seen the mermaid said that the creature appeared to be half a lovely young girl and half fish, sometimes jumping high into the air like a dolphin. Many witnesses said that the mermaid did all kinds of aquatic tricks before it disappeared. Although a lonely sailor might at first have thought he had spotted a mermaid, the creatures are more often entities of violence and death than a bizarre romantic rendezvous in the surf. I'll stop here before I continue. I was about to say, hey, Shaun, everything in the beginning sounds like so lovely. It's like almost making you tempted to go and see the place for yourself. And I'm like, but wait, didn't people who actually saw creatures like this? Again, we're not saying this is true. We don't know. We didn't spot anything like that in our lives. But people who have seen or think they've seen something like this, they have felt some demonic or evil presence. Now, there could be a very logical, and we're logical people. So there could be a very logical question. Well, why would be a mermaid or a merman? Why would they be evil? Like, aren't they just like, if they exist, like some type of hybrids, some type of entities that like fish, they just live in the sea, and if they're like acting like dolphins, well, there's nothing nefarious about it. But that's the thing that the dark side always play with, always comes with similar image, visual appearance, voice, image, or anything that can resemble you of someone dear beloved in your life, a friend, or deceased spouse or grandma. And that's how they usually lure you into something. Into what? I can't overgeneralize, but if it's not oppression or that, it usually begins with some sort of a lie. And I'm always going back to that story we covered several months ago with Virginia, the fake girl ghost that actually happened to be a demon, right? By the end of the story, we figure out. So how would you, if someone would come and say to you, come on, Shaun, like not everything is demonic. And I would agree, not everything is demonic. I go to a Pentecostal church and I would agree, I would be the first one saying not everything is demonic, right? But like these entities, they have a history of luring people into something like, oh, I'm beautiful, look how good it's almost like that forbidden fruit in the garden. Look how beautiful I look. Just touch me, just have me. Just don't even think about the consequences. And once when you go there, there's a price to pay with that. What would be your comment on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you think about these creatures, the mermaids and the sirens, that the sirens are the bird-like women and the mermaids are the fish-like women, and they have the same kind of role, but they came out of different environments. The bird-like one is more Babylonian, and the fish-like one is more Greek. But they had the same function, which was to lure men to their death, using beauty. So it's like weaponized beauty, using both the beautiful uh, visage of a woman, but also singing with beautiful voices that would lure men into their death. So famously, the mermaids would often shipwreck ships because they would be singing out to the men who would desire to come closer, and there would be rocks where either the ship would end up with the keel stuck in the sandbar and tip over, and then people die, or it would collide against stones, and that would break open the hole, and then the ship would capsize, sink, and then everyone dies. And so this was kind of a common myth. What's interesting is when we talk about what we think about this in Christianity, Clement of Alexandria actually compared the Christian life to Odysseus's voyage, dealing with these exact creatures, saying not to be tempted and lured off the path. So when you're looking at what the church fathers said about these things, they were taking them as they are and saying, yeah, these are things, are part of these myths, these stories. Uh, he's not necessarily saying, oh, I absolutely believe that this is a thing that happened, but without necessarily endorsing it, just receiving the Odyssey as part of the Western literary canon. He's saying this is how Christians think about this, right? What's interesting is when Jerome was translating the Latin Vulgate from the original Hebrew to the Latin, when he got to, I think it's Isaiah 13, when it's talking about the ruins and what'll be there, he made the same translation choice that the Greeks did, translating the word that we now see as ostrich into siren. So the he made that translation decision into the Latin language, and the earlier Greeks translating it made that decision into the Greek language. So that this species of critter that is a demonic species that's supposed to be inhabiting places of ruins and wreckage is the choice that I shouldn't say they both is a choice that both translators made. The translation team that took care of the Septuagint and Jerome, who was kind of fastidiously translating the Latin, wanted to make sure that it was a very accurate and appropriate translation because he didn't necessarily trust the Greek to just translate it from Greek into Latin. He wanted to go back to the original Hebrew. And he did speak Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. He was a great scholar. But he created that translation and he chose that same word. So we're looking at, I mean, today, obviously, scholars would disagree with that and say, well, it's probably an ostrich, right? But that's not the choice that they made in the ancient world. That's not the choice that the early first century people. I mean, obviously Jerome was living in the fourth century, but still, I mean, very close, right? That the choices that they made for those words were the mythological creature, not what we would just say. Oh, that's what an ostrich. That's where an ostrich lives. And to be fair, ostriches the type of bird that an ostrich is, it's in the family of the cassowary and the emu. They don't only live in sparse, ruined areas. In fact, it's kind of funny. You may have heard that the Australian Army went to war against emus and lost, because there were the emus were way too many. So yeah, the Australians waged war against the emus and they conceded defeat that the emus were too many. So that's why there's so many emus in Australia.
Maybe they need better weapons over there in Australia. I don't know what's happening. That's unheard of. But I like how you went to the historical theology. I mentioned a couple of different church fathers because that reminds me of one of the books that we covered a few times before, Apostolic Fathers in English, which I think I have third edition by scholar Michael Holmes, and that's one of the books I recommend to everyone to buy. We know by the end of the first century, Clement in Rome, and in the third century, Tertullian, and there are like a couple of other church fathers as well, who, for example, mention Phoenix. Now, it's easy to brush off and say in 21st century as a Christian, well, that's just mythological creature. It doesn't exist. That's easy to say because we didn't find evidence. But they believed, or at least one can make a sense that it was a type of polemical or apologetic, approach or strategy to use something that was well known in their world, in their lifetime, and say, well, just like with Phoenix, we can compare that and see that Jesus' resurrection does make sense, even from natural, but yet even more supernatural point of view. So I can give them that, but I think that they did believe in something like this. So I just want to say how I don't accept that they're primitive people. Now, was everything true they ever believed? Of course not. Not even their early Jews and Hebrews. That's not the point. The point is that their worldview was way more supernatural than ours. So again, if they believed in mermaids, if they believe in, we remember the stories of, we dedicated one podcast to Saint Anthony, the first monastic, who was dealing with he was seeing all type of spiritual attacks and demonic creatures, including and now I can't believe it, but didn't he see half of a donkey or zebra, half of a human, something like that? And then he was seeing shapeshifters, right? Do you remember the exact creature he saw?
I don't remember the exact creature that he said that he saw, but
It was something of a centaur, something of that sort
yeah,
that he
yeah,
witnessed,
like a centaur,
and
yeah.
then just boom, disappear. And then, but it would disappear because he was praying against it. So I'm like, well, how come they witness all of these things? We don't witness them anymore. Now, am I saying that I would like to see a shape-shifting centaur attacking me while I'm praying? Of course not. But I'm just saying, from their perspective, or early apostolic fathers, and apologists, and missionaries, it absolutely would make sense what we are reading. In 21st century, we are not so much into supernatural.
No, and you know, and even think about it, I think it was Josephus in the Antiquities when he was discussing the signs that led up to the siege of Jerusalem. He said that there was a report that a cow had given birth to a lamb, which is like insane. Like, right? I mean, you know, just biologically, what we know about biology, we know that's not possible, right? That's just, it's completely impossible for a cow to give birth to a lamb. But if people said that they saw it, and I imagine people who saw it, then they would tell other people, and they would come and look and see a lamb suckling on a cow, like, oh yeah, this obviously gave birth to this. Um, then you have enough credibility there that's built up over the people who witnessed it, that it finally ended up getting to Josephus, and he records it as a chronicler of Rome. So I just think that that's, you know, an example that we have of, hey, you know what? There's something supernatural going on here.
And I'll just add one more thing before we go. I was just checking if I said what was true about Saint Anthony, and it was true. He did witness seeing something of a centaur in Egyptian desert. But not only that, I completely forgot, because we covered this story 2 years ago or more. He also mentioned witnessing a satyr. And some of these entities, again, while he was minding his own business, spending time with God in the desert alone, they will come attack him while he'll be fasting, he'll be praying, he'll be seeking God, and these entities would come and attack him spiritually. And of course, you have to feel dread and pressure and some type of fear. But then after he would pray constantly against these things, they would just disappear in thin air. So I'm like, that's why Phoenix for Tertullian and for what was the church father we mentioned by the end of the first century? I forgot. Clement, you know, in their writings, it makes more sense from their perspective and worldview that they believed in Phoenix, at least in a type of Phoenix that will compare it to the resurrection of Jesus. So I'm just saying how all of these things are very beautiful when we see it from the historical theology perspective.
Well, and even imagine somebody as recent, and you know, we've tossed around the idea of doing a podcast episode on him, but Padre Pio, right? The things that he saw in his life, to compare that, a phoenix would be nothing. Like a phoenix would be, yeah, like that's totally ordinary. I mean, to literally watch his room get turned upside down while he's standing in the middle of it, like just in insanity. So yeah, you can imagine these great saints were seeing things in their daily life, in their daily prayer, you know, where they're being afflicted by the demonic to try to get them to stop praying and seeking after God. That, man, yeah, there's a fiery bird that dies and is born again. Yeah, that's totally normal.
By the way, I love how we read a few sentences and we start commenting for 15 minutes, and it's not even the end of the first page, and we have like 10 pages. I love it, and no one says we have a deadline when we have to cover the whole chapter, and we can skip some stuff. But I just want to say this is the best part of 3M. These spontaneous outbursts of like passion and knowledge and nerdiness and everything. This is what drives me to want to do this, even when the outcome and results are not very impressive by the end of the day, because this is what we do from our hearts. Also, how about in the next week, 2 or 3, let's say 3 weeks maximum? It could be next week, but that would depend on who will be my guest on Sunday, how much I have to prepare. If I have to read for my Sunday guest a lot, then I don't want to be dealing with a lot of Padre Pio or other reading. But let's try to cover Padre Pio biography in the next few weeks, because I think that will be phenomenal, especially now that you told me about some of his, stuff in his life happening. I think that will be cool. Anyway, I haven't forgot where we stopped. Okay, so although a lonely sailor might at first have spotted, might have thought he had spotted a mermaid, the creatures are more often entities of violence and death than a bizarre romantic rendezvous in the surf. Although there are also mermen, the greatest fascination has always been on the mermaid, with her top half and a beautiful woman and her bottom half that of a fish. Traditionally, the mermaid is also gifted with a lovely singing voice, and you just talked about this 5 minutes ago, which can be used to warn sailors of approaching storms or jagged rocks ahead. Well, in that case, that's beautiful. But if they're using or abusing that to lure them or hypnotize them, especially, lonely, I'm sorry for saying this word, horny sailors on a boat, like it's easy to deceive them. Men are generally stupid and shallow. Give them one or two things, they'll fall for it. I don't care how godly they are. And then it says, or in many of the ancient stories, the seducing siren song of the mermaids lures the seamen into the jagged rocks to their deaths. That's the point I was trying to make. So they can use or abuse their abilities. In folklore, mermaids sometimes fall in love with humans and are able to come ashore in human shape, so shapeshifters, and to live on land for many years. They may even have children with their human husbands. But in all these tales of mere creatures and human mates, the mermaid longs to return to the sea, and one day she will leave her human family and return to the sea. And that's the end of the beginning of the introduction. Now, Shaun, before I let you read the following page with these two entities, I won't even try to pronounce them. I'll leave that to you. And of course, Amber will correct you if you make a mistake. So woe to you, Shaun. But yeah, I was saying like, they're able to mate and create hybrids. How is this that difficult? I mean, different from Genesis 6 and First Enoch? It's not. Now, how would that all work biologically? How would this all work theologically? How they can even shapeshift and live on a land for years and then return into the sea? I have no clue. And again, this is not urban. This is an ancient legend, and in every legend there's some truth. If there's any truth in that, I will have to have so many questions. But again, if we would cross-reference First Enoch and Genesis 6, this makes perfect sense. And all these hybrids and all these things, if that would be true, I'm saying at least biblically we can compare them, make some cross-reference points. If are they true, we have no clue. But the very beginning of this whole chapter is promising because we can find some historical or biblical theology cross references for this. Do you want to comment on that, or you want to start with the next two creatures?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, like, we're obviously not talking about some sort of undiscovered creature, because we know that fish, for the most part, lay eggs. We know that humans are placental mammals, so we need to have, like, that's something required for gestation. And you can't have both of those things, right? There are some fish that give live birth, like some sharks give live birth. But that's kind of, they have like soft eggs that hatch on the, inside the mother and then are born out alive. That's not how humans work. Like as placental mammals, we're not even like that closely related to marsupials, who are also mammals, that they kind of outsource the gestation into a pouch. That's like basically a fish doesn't have the innards to be able to procreate with a mammal. So obviously this has to be something that's supernatural. It's not just an undiscovered creature. All right, let's go on and read this one. Okay. Wow. Do you have any idea how that's pronounced?
No, that's why I left it for you, because I'm like, I'm tired of butchering all the names in the
No,
last 8 years. I always get embarrassed. So like, would this be Sizg? I don't know.
Let's see. I'm gonna look up the pronunciation so I don't butcher it.
You can. If Amber finds any fault with you, that's okay.
Let's see here. Kiosk. That's how it's pronounced.
Oh my god, it's completely wrong. Remember when we did the episode on that spiritualist British guy who's into conspiracies and lizard people, David?
Oh, David Icke.
David Icke. And for 2 hours I was saying Ike, and we were going live. You can't change it. And by the end of the video that we're assessing, the narrator said Ike. I'm like, dang it, for 2 hours I've been saying Ike, and it's like, it's embarrassing, but I'm like, it is what it is. Let's roll with it. So it's Ike now.
Yeah. Okay, so the kiosk is a type of mermaid that haunts the lakes of the Scottish Highlands. Her upper body and facial features are those of a beautiful, well endowed woman, but her lower half is that of a very large salmon. If a handsome young man with a good heart should capture her attention and treat her well, she may assume human shape and marry him, at the same time granting him three wishes, which may make them very wealthy. If she feels that she has been disrespected or treated badly, she may use her beauty to lure a fisherman to the deepest part of the lake and drown him. Yeah, wow. I mean,
A vengeful female spirit.
absolutely. This idea that yeah, if you treat her well, then you get wishes, three wishes. So kind of like genie, you get
Yeah.
three wishes, and then I mean, it seems to be that yeah, she will marry him and grant him three wishes. So uh, the idea is that she's going to spend her life with him, and if not, then he's going to spend the rest of his life, which will be a very short period of time, with her.
So I see stories like this maybe being created to scare men to be better husbands. I don't see this necessarily true. I see this as like, hey, woe to you, because you don't know actually if the woman you married, how do you know if she's like 100% woman? This, we're talking about centuries in the past. They didn't have DNA results. So like, woe to you, because if you beat her up or like whatever, don't give her food or clothes or cheat on her or whatever you do, woe to you, because she may come in the nighttime and like have revenge on you, and then you're dead. So I think something like this could have been made, just like kids stories for kids to behave. This could be something like for husbands to behave. Okay, do you want to deal with devas and
Uh,
then the
yeah, I was
divas?
just gonna say, like Paul says, you may have entertained angels unaware. You may have entertained the kiosk unaware. So be careful what you do out there, young man.
Hey, don't add to the Bible. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
Right. Okay. Devas are nature spirits that possess the energies required to make barren soil fertile and productive. So it kind of sounds like a pixie or a sprite. In 1975, we met with David Spangler, a director of the Findhorn Foundation. Ooh, I've heard of this. The Findhorn Foundation, where they took like a barren coast and they started giving offerings to the little pixie spirits, and the soil ended up becoming like fertile soil, and it was all just rocky and barren. And just through they didn't add anything to the soil. They just gave gifts to the land spirits, and the soil ended up becoming fertile soil. But yeah, no, I've heard of this before. Okay, the Feinhorn Foundation and asked him if he felt the devas and the nature spirits were benignly concerned with the welfare of human beings. He replied, "The majority of them are benignly concerned about our welfare, but I would say that what they are primarily concerned about is the maintenance of harmony and wholeness, a synergistic state with the earth. They recognize that humanity as a species is necessary and vital part of the synergistic state. Therefore, the health of humanity is their concern because it reflects the health of the planet. Also, humanity wields forces at the moment which bear directly on the health of the planet. At the same time, there is a definite impression that humanity is important but not indispensable. Sometimes we get the feeling they're saying if humanity doesn't get it together, a whole different evolutionary cycle may take over, which will move us out of the picture, at least in our present state." Do you remember we did that episode where the dude said that the squids were going to take over?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was hilarious. But also, I'm thinking while I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about UFO stories where they supposedly see our space brothers and aliens are so concerned about ecology and will the human race continue existing and will Earth continue existing? Like, dude, why do you care? We're not even in your front yard. Like, if you truly exist as you who you claim to be. So this I see similarities. Like, oh, they're so concerned about us because they quote unquote love us so much. But I bet if you would preach the gospel to these entities, just like you mentioned Jesus to these aliens, they're like, oh, Jesus is cool, but like start going into the gospel and Jesus' divinity, they don't like that. They start showing their nasty nature. So this is just reminding me of the UFO stories and those aliens. They're so concerned about our well-being.
Well, it's interesting because when you ask the UFO guys, especially the ones who have been, have say they've had interaction with the aliens, They say that their main concerns are the earth and the balance of the ecosystem, and they're very concerned with humans' ability to use nuclear weapons. And so that's why you mostly see them around military installation. So they don't, or yeah, they want a healthy climate, and they don't want war. So can we conclude that Greta Thunberg is an alien just from?
Yes, and also that aliens, at least in movies, they love America. That's
Oh
the
yeah,
thing about. I don't know if it's because of nuclear weapon. Maybe that power draws them to them. But it's like they just love coming here. I don't know why. I hope they don't land somewhere in my neighborhood
right.
or Greta. Either of them. I don't want any of them here.
Beam me up, Greta. Oh, all right. The entities weren't really concerned about Findhorn raising vegetables as much as they were concerned with getting across the point of their existence. They felt it was a real necessity that humanity alter its conception of reality so as to include their existence. So that's kind of scary. The idea that, hey, we're here and it's important that you recognize that we're here. uh the thing that is most terrifying to me is knowing about the whole Findhorn thing, that they were leaving offerings to the spirits, which, I mean, I don't think you can construe that any way other than worshiping a false god.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna start with elementals. And because it's on 2 page, we'll see if we'll skip something. The elementary spirits, the so-called elementals, are the unseen intelligences that inhabit the 4 basic elements of the material plane. The creatures of the air are known as, is it sylphs? Okay. Of the earth,
So yep.
gnomes. Of fire, salamanders. I always love salamanders in fantasy stories and RPG games. And of water, the nymphs or undines or undines.
I've always pronounced it undines.
Undines. Okay, cool. Thanks. According to ancient tradition, before the fall, oh, now actually they're getting Bible involved in the story. I like this. According to ancient tradition, before the fall, Adam had complete control over these entities. After the fall from grace in the Garden of Eden, Adam lost his easy access to the elementals, but he was still able to command their obedience by means of certain incantations and spells. The same ancient tradition suggests that such communication with the unseen entities can be established by sincere magician who seeks out the old spells. Others say that the ancient incantations are unnecessary. All that is required to gain the support of the elementals is to recognize their presence and powers and to live openly in a manner that indicates the magician is respectful but unafraid of the forces of nature. Okay, Shaun, I'll stop here. I want to mention a couple of things and I would like to hear your comment. First, even if it's a legend, this account about Adam controlling them through incantations after the fall, it's pure imagination. Second thing, what I'm thinking about these elementals, I can't help myself but not to go to Galatians 4, where Paul is actually talking about elemental principles or spirits of this world. He says, for example, in Galatians 4:3. So also when we were children, we were in slavery, talking about spiritual slavery, under the elemental principles of the world. Few verses down in Galatians 4:9, Paul says, but now that you know God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you're turning back to those weak and miserable principles or elementals? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? And here Paul uses in Greek word stoicheia, with a strict legalistic observance of religious rituals, calendars, and the law of Moses. He's arguing that clinging to human-made rules or attempting to earn favor through religious routines is a form of spiritual childhood and slavery, which Christ has already overcome, and so on and so on. But what I'm focusing, also there are passages in Colossians, let's say Colossians 2:8. Paul says, see it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. Also Colossians 2:20, Since you died with Christ to the elemental spiritual forces of this world, why, as though you still belong to the world, do you submit to its rules? Basically, these elemental forces, they're real spiritual entities. They're not, this is not a metaphor, it's not a form of speech. And I have to go elsewhere without quoting Paul, but when he talks about different type of spiritual entities and their roles, like thrones and dominions and stuff like this, these are elemental spirits. And they're not mentioned in a good light, neither in Galatians 4 or nor in Colossians 2. So, and then we're talking here about elemental spirits in this book. They're called elementals, and that they're present and they do exist based on their level or plane of existence. Supposedly, they're not just air creatures, but they're also in the earth. They're also of water, and they're also of fire. Now that we read Paul, what he said in a couple passages, how can we compare what we read so far? Obviously, elementals are usually seen as bad and very real spiritual forces in the New Testament. But again, so far, how can we compare this with gnomes, with sylphs, with salamanders, with undines, and all these other creatures that are supposedly called elementals?
Well, okay. So first, the stoicheia that you referenced, there are people who today will translate those as basic principles, like I think the direct translation is like things in a row. So, they would say like these were the preparatory steps for the gospel. And so, certain Jewish ordinances would be something that they thought was in context for this. I don't think that that's the case. And the reason that I don't think that that's the case is when we go to the earliest church fathers, how did they interpret it? Justin Martyr said that what he's referring to there is the elemental gods that were enslaved in the fall of Adam. And then Athanasius says that the reason that Paul was being critical of them of these elemental spirits isn't necessarily because they're not powerful, but it's because compared to Christ, they're nothing. And so, in doing this, Paul is directly mocking the elemental worship that was happening in Greece at that time. Um, and then a little bit later, you have people like Origen who are saying that the elemental spirits are divine holy beings, and that the reason that Paul calls them weak is again comparison to Christ. And Tertullian thinks that what was actually taking place there, he takes a little bit different view, is they were originally created as divine holy beings, but in the fall, what ended up happening was, so you had a divine order of God, man, and these elemental spirits, which is like what the author talked about. And then when humanity was subjected to Satan, he put himself below these elemental spirits. And the Genesis says that God cursed the ground for Adam's sake. So Paul says that all of creation was subjected to futility, meaning that these things are maybe in a fallen state, but maybe they themselves didn't disobey God. They're just being subjected to this fallen state. And so Adam is supposed to have authority and reign over them, but in his current state, he's being subjected to the things like, the air and the earth, and so he's made to become less than that which he was made to reign over, which then will be righted in the resurrection. um, the first people to, or the first person to think that, it has nothing to do with elemental spirits, is actually placing things in a right order, was Augustine. And of course, the reason is that in the fourth century, the fourth and fifth century, people were no longer worshiping, animistic elemental spirits. Uh, Neoplatonism had really taken over, and so there was no concept of, hey, well, let's just worship. We worship water because it's water, right? Like that wasn't a thing anymore. So he had no context for understanding that. But the earlier church fathers, they knew exactly what Paul was talking about, and so when someone says, "Oh yeah, well, it just means like basic principles or preparatory steps for the gospel," well, you're taking that out of the context, because the church fathers knew what we were talking about, and Paul was definitely talking about the elementary spirits of the world, and he's saying to be enslaved once again to the elementary spirits of the world, which is exactly what Tertullian was talking about when he's saying that the order had been inverted. So yeah, elemental spirits, I'm all about that.
And again, I'm not saying that anything in this account of the book we're reading is true, but I'm just letting my imagination work. What would be elemental spirits beyond what Paul was talking about? And again, if there are four, or at least four elements in the nature, well, then could these entities with small e Elohim, the small g God, these spirits who are in control of these elements, could they shapeshift? Do they have their own armies? Do they have their own, soldiers that are, in allegiance to them? So, and if that would work, how would they look like then? Do they look like, if an elemental spirit is in the control of the realm of fire, then could something like salamander exist that can maybe come from the ground or shapeshift, have this certain abilities, powers like heat or fire, disappear? I'm not saying this exists. I'm just saying that if we would connect stuff like this and start allowing the bigger picture to unravel, and of course we don't have many pieces, all the pieces of the puzzle, but I'm just saying this is how biblical theology with historical theology, church fathers, apocrypha, Bible commentaries, dissecting Hebrew, dissecting Greek, and then when we see something like this, we don't necessarily have all the answers, but we can at least make connections and those bridges. Without supernatural worldview of the Bible, we won't have this bridge. We'll be like, all of this is nonsense, all of this is garbage, all of this is our fairy tales and kids stories, boom, done. And I was one of them. Who would mock all of this. I'm like, I want to read this as a fantasy novel or maybe watch as a TV show, but that's it. I don't see anything of this being remotely true. And now, while I'm not saying it's true, I'm saying I can see some of these things actually existing and how they can deceive and scare people through different generations, through different cultures and different people throughout the globe. I can see that happening. How much is true again? I don't know. But at least I can make that connection versus the old me who were like almost fundamentalist. It's not in the Bible, boom, done, close the Bible, and we're done. So thank God for saving me from this fundamental approach to our beautiful, deep, and mysterious faith. The appearance of the elementals, when discerned by the human eye, is that of attractive males and beautiful females. Because they are created of the pure essences of their element, they may live for centuries. But because they were fashioned of terrestrial elements, their souls are not immortal, as are those of humans. If, however, an elemental should be joined in marriage to a human, their union can transform the creature's soul into a spirit that may enjoy eternal life. Very interesting. Oh yeah, we don't have to agree, but it's very interesting how they see this. Some of the greatest figures of antiquity, such as Zoroaster, Alexander, Merlin, and Hercules, were reported to have been the children of elementary spirits. While most traditions hold the elementals, whether or not they are seen or unseen, to be friendly to humans and in general benignly disposed to providing assistance to righteous endeavors, some authorities warn that each of the four elements contain a number of mischief makers and entities that tend more toward the demonic than the angelic. Okay, Shaun, how would you discern this last couple of paragraphs? Is it like, oh, these creatures are cool, they love people, or at least they're okay, they don't even have to love us, but we can be friendly with them, we don't attack them, they don't attack us, but every once in a while there's someone who is, acting goofy or weird, maybe just like Loki would act like, it just comes to my mind as an example, but most of them, they're very cool. Based again on what? If we would approach it through biblical lenses, again, that doesn't mean all of these entities will be evil or want to attack you first or want to kill you. We don't know. Not everything is like black and white. Not everything is necessarily a demon and an angel. There can be different classes of entities that we don't know of. But I mean, it will be, I think this is also on one side, as much as I don't like overgeneralizing everything, this is on one side. On the other side, also very oversimplified, I think. Or Zoroaster, Alexander, Merlin, well, these are all cool. These are all good. But once in a while, there could be one acting goofy or evil and hating or attacking humans. And I think there should be a warning for this because we don't know their bloodlines. We don't know if these entities truly existed. We don't know their attributes, their characteristics. We don't know their very nature, their very hearts. who would be their not so much physical but like spiritual parents, how they came to existence, who they put their allegiance to. If it wasn't Christ, then who did they serve? So I wouldn't just overly, I mean, I wouldn't easily oversimplify this and put it in a category of like, oh, they're like all benignly disposed, as it says in the text. Would you agree or maybe disagree?
Yeah, I would say that you can just look at how many people drown every year. Like, I don't think that they're necessarily out for benevolence. Um, I don't think that we can think of them in that way. I think when you think of the elements as we understand them, that's the proper way to think about them. We already kind of have this abstract notion that fire is hot. It can be useful. It can also burn your house down, and perhaps that's the correct way to approach the fire elemental. Is it can be useful for fire. Like, obviously you're not going to, as a Christian, have any communication with any spirit other than Jesus, right? Like, that's it. um but as far as whether or not they can be beneficial, um I think the way that you interact with the element itself is it's maybe it the way that we experience it is the personality of the elemental. That is, like I already said about fire, like water. uh Water is deadly. Wind, or air. You can't really live without it. But also, we're in tornado season, so uh and yeah. um I don't know. I think it would be kind of weird for people to, be like, oh yeah, the elementals are my friend. Like, nah, homie, you're just weird. Like, you just collect rocks. It's it's not that deep. So
You just love hugging trees, admit it.
right.
Saying something like that. Um, so now the author quotes, he gives a lengthy quotation. I don't know if I'll read everything from Michael Mott, who is the author of Caverns, Cauldrons, and Concealed Creatures. The author, Michael Mott, he issues a number of warnings pertinent to those humans who might be seriously considering dealing with sylphs, undines, salamanders, gnomes, and other entities. And this is what Michael Mott says. He says, encounters with elemental beings are not also charming. Elementals are notoriously capricious and unpredictable, and they're usually indifferent at best and dangerous at their worst. Well, this is like dealing with ghosts, with spirits, with everything else. Theosophists, such as Theosophists, Rosicrucians, I probably butchered that, it's okay, and spiritualists tended to theorize that fairies are elementals but are also spirits existing on another plane. Yet the Neoplatonists and later the alchemists of the Middle Ages believed them to be of a finer and more subtle type of matter, somewhere between men and the angels. They had flesh after a fashion and fleshly desires to go with it. The wizard Merlin, his name meaning of the sea or of the water, was supposedly the result of the lust of an elemental for a human woman. And again, I'm going to Genesis 6. While there is traditionally some interrelationship between the four types of elementals, it seems that many fairy tales of beings from Northern and Western Europe have a close relationship to the gnome, underworld, and undine mermaid or merman varieties. According to Reverend Robert Kirk, oh, we did cover this book like a year ago or more. According to Reverend Robert Kirk, who wrote the famous books The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies in 17th century, the fairies who abducted and later released him were composed of, how do you pronounce this, congealed air, or a finer type of matter. Yet in defense of the spiritual aspect of theory, fairy association and fairyland entrances were often with subterranean regions or necropolises, whatever this word is, as barrows, tumuli, ruined hilly forts, mounds, and the like. Caves, wild gorges, and chasms also had the same type of fairy associations, however, as did crevices or cracks in rocks which were too narrow for human beings to enter. Through the centuries, some have theorized that the fairies of the British Isles were fallen angels, not impossible, the souls of the pagan or unbaptized dead, or the actual hidden descendants or races of men which had been defeated by the Celts and driven into hiding eventually beneath the ground. Here, after long ages, they often became diminutive in form and stature due to cramped quarters, poor nutrition, and inbreeding. Walter Evans once reports an interesting belief held by David McRitchie previously, who is in his book The Testimony of Tradition in 1890, noted the similarity between the word pixies or pixies and Picts, a Bronze Age pre-Celtic people whom he saw as non-Aryan, a possibility at least before the coming of the Celts, and dwarf-like, the latter now known to be false. But what might years of interbreeding in a subterranean environment due to the statue of a people or isolated groups of survivors in hiding from taller stranger invaders do? The finding of apparent Neolithic dwarf remains, an entire tribe of dwarfs in Switzerland in 1893, lent credence to the theory of ancient pygmy races who had been driven into a slinking clandestine and eventually subterranean existence throughout Europe. To the Victorians, this led to the conclusion that dwarfism and midgetism were possibly due to the racial residue of Cro-Magnon types interbreeding with these ancient types of people, and that the fairies were simply natural and early forms of men. For a time, even the spiritualists and theosophists adopted this theory as their own. This didn't last as soon. These groups were back into the esoteric, elemental, or natural spirit concepts. Wow, that was a long quote from this other book, and maybe that will give us a good idea for future podcasts to assess the other book. You know, but wow. So of course, again, we are not supporting any of these beliefs or reports to be true, but I'm just imagining. My mind goes as I'm reading. I'm imagining this underworld where these spirits may exist, may appear in different shapes, disappear, scare people. Sometimes you may think, even when they show on the surface in different shapes, that they're benign or they just leave you alone. But sometimes they may come and attack you or pretend to be nice and whatever, benign, but actually they are not. So different cultures, not just the Celts, have names for them. Some would think, oh, these were like the missing links, maybe in evolution. These were like the pygmies or the Neanderthals or this or that. But the author says, what if they were like actually hybrids of people and all these ancient type of elemental spirits? Of course, we don't know if it's true, but it's not impossible if we go to Genesis 6 and First Enoch. So it was a lot of information given in this last entry of the chapter. But what will be your thoughts? Like, this is I'm intrigued by what Michael Mott wrote this in his book, and it's like we can't prove if anything was true or not, but it's like so interesting how especially when they were giving the account of the reverend in the 17th century, Reverend Robert Kirk, who witnessed, I was in the underground, abducted by fairies. They were like changing shapes and forms, and then I was let go. So it's like, I hope there is some truth in that, because he was a reverend. He shouldn't be lying and inventing these things. How can we connect all of these things with the Bible?
Well, so with the Bible, you had in Deuteronomy 32, right? You had the Israelis that were going out into the desert and were giving worship to the Shadim, right? Which were the territorial land spirits. And so, I mean, Michael Heiser makes a point that the Shadim, they're translated as demon, but they're actually not demons. They belong to another classification of spirit that very well could have been something like an elemental, right? Um, and we know that the later Greeks had a tendency to worship these elementals. These are types of critters that were As you said, they were kind of all over the place, right? I mean, the idea that Picts were related to a pre-Celtic people known as or I guess Pixies were the Picts, were somehow related to this pre-Celtic people, um, and that then you have that kind of either evolving, which we could understand how narratively that would evolve, or it actually maps onto the idea of the Irish saying that the Tuatha De Danann live in the hills, and the idea of the Scottish saying that fairies live in the hills, and then the idea that the land whites live in the barrows or the barrows, the mounds of the northern Europeans. These kind of all just coalesce into this maybe ancient idea that the spirits live underground. Um, and like I said, in Deuteronomy 32, you do see them going out into the desert and offering sacrifices to these spirits, which is exactly what you see happening in Findhorn, where they're offering food offerings to these spirits. I think that there's a connection, right? I mean, I don't think that it's too hard to force a connection between those two. Paul then later refers to the elemental spirits. Our early church fathers, we brought up what they said about them. I think it's a pretty strong case to be made that a biblical worldview includes these elemental spirits. Now, whether you think that they're part of the legion of the demonic, or as I posited from Tertullian, that maybe this is just an inversion, that they're not necessarily um, wicked, that they're just doing their job, but that the whole natural order has fallen, and so they didn't necessarily disobey. They're just like, hey, we don't have orders. We're just going to keep doing our job, which is kind of something that I've said before regarding guardian spirits, like the Bigfoot and the Yeti.
We mentioned this many times, including that 2 super long episodes we did on the phantoms in Western Europe and North Europe lore. How sometimes these people will see armies in the sky, or will see like people would witness spirits in the woods. They'll just pass by them. If you're not destroying anything, attacking anyone, these spirits will let you live and just pass and not pay attention to you. And when I ask you, Shaun, how does this match the divine world, the divine council worldview? Are these good guys or bad guys? And that's the thing. What I'm saying, we can't always go black and white. We can't overgeneralize. What if some of these spirits are of the structure that is not necessarily mentioned in the Bible, or maybe they are with different name? They're not necessarily good or bad. They're just doing their job of protecting and being guardians of that little place of nature, and that's it. And they're responsible to God. They're not preaching to us. They're not talking to us. They're just protecting that piece of land. And I'm open to that, even though theologically and logically, I don't know how else to put him except that. And it's vague, but at least with Dr. Heiser and other scholars, at least I have concept and worldview where to put him. Otherwise, without that, I'm like, but this is just a fairy tale. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say that we already talked about these seemingly neutral spirits because we don't know where to put them.
But it would make sense that if you had these spirits that were placed right, and were placed over creation, and then you had a rebellion happen with Satan, right? And so you have Satan who fell, and then you have the angels that are now going in, and their job is to minister to those who are being saved, right? So they're the ministers of fire that are set up to be saved, and we only see them in this very specific, very narrow category, that these are what the angels are. And then we don't understand that there's all of this variety of spirits that were created, that are not just part of the hosts of heaven, but are spirits that were set to order creation. And so the fall happens after they were given their orders of what their jurisdiction is. And so when you look at something like where Tolkien includes like the Ents, and you see them looking at like this war, and they're like, that's not my concern. Like I predate this. Like, or like Tom Bombadil, like, are you going to get involved in this? No. Like that's not my fight, right? But then if you were to uh, go in and encroach on their territory where they have jurisdiction, they're no longer a neutral party, right? Because they're like, I know what to do with this. This is the marching orders that I was given, right? And so I think that there are these, or at least it could be that there are these spirits that God had given them this domain, had given them their marching orders. Satan comes and rebels against God. The angels that we view as angels, who are the ministers that are specifically sent to deal with the salvation of those who are being saved. Um, they're the ministers that the Bible talks about. That's our very narrow line of communication. The only other spirits that we see, the cherubim and the seraphim and all these, those are only seen in like visions of heaven. They don't interact with us, right? We're never interacting with those spirits. Um, so how many other types of spirits are there that we're just not interacting with? We don't even have them on our radar. Uh, you know, the old systematic setups for angels, they had 9 choirs of angels, and angels comprised the bottom tier. The rest of them were, basically holding creation together under the commands of God, that He said, "Hey, this is how this works. This is what you do." And then they are divinely, or they are following divine orders to tune that to a specific way. That, okay, well, this is how this works, because that's their job, is to keep all that in order. Um, so yeah, I mean, in that view, in the medieval view, that makes sense that that there would be just this variety in the spirit world, and some that aren't involved in the rebellion between Satan and God, because that is a very one-dimensional view. It just has to do with the salvation of humanity.
I don't want to comment because we were already 1 hour and we still have so many creatures. So can you please go with elves, and then after that I'll go with fairies or something else.
Okay, going to elves. In old Germany, elf was a name applied to any kind of supernatural spirit, especially one that inhabited fields or forests. In Scotland, England, and Scandinavia, elf was another name for a member of the fairy folk. Then, as fairy lore developed and became more intricate and complex, with levels and classes within their supernatural ranks, the English designated elves as smaller members of the fairy population, and the Scots gave the title of elf to those beings that were generally of human size. Things changed a bit in Scandinavia as well, when the people there began to distinguish 2 categories of elves: the benign ones and the dastardly ones. The Scandinavians, who envisioned 2 principal divisions of the beings, I'm sorry, the Scandinavians also envisioned 2 principal divisions of the beings. There were the lovely, charming elves who easily passed for humans and who loved to join in folk dances and in village parties. These elves, especially the females of the bunch, could easily seduce any human male into obeying their will. The male elves, though appearing handsome and dashing in the firelight of a village festival, would usually be exposed as a squat and or as squat and ugly when moonlight struck them in the forests. Huh. So like the handsome prince turns into a toad kind of thing. The Danes also noticed that even the attractive elves occasionally betrayed themselves with a long cow-like tail that popped out of their dress or trousers. That reminds me of the deer woman, who has the lower body of like a deer, but the upper body of a beautiful woman, and that you can always tell, because there's a giveaway that the spirit doesn't completely turn into something
Mm.
else.
I
Uh,
never heard of the deer woman. So it will look like a regular woman, like walking on 2 legs, no hind legs, no forelegs, but just there she will have, or it will have like a little tail.
a tail or deer hooves, and so
Mm.
that's part of the Native American lore, that this is this a spirit. It's a shape shifting spirit that is trying to seduce you.
This is similar to what we said at the beginning of the podcast. This is similar to what Saint Anthony was seeing in the Egyptian desert,
Yep.
with those half, with animals. I mean, shape shifting spirits that we have, human have with what, like donkey or a horse or an ox, and having hooves and stuff, and he would pray and that would disappear. Like,
Yeah.
very interesting how even in works of Tolkien and the Greek mythology and all of these things, it's interesting how all of these races of so-called mythological entities and creatures, and in video games, we take them so much as fun, as something invented and put, passed on generation, like just like as a fairy tale. But it's interesting how many of these, if not all of these entities, have actually deep roots in our cultures, all of our peoples. It's who we are. It's like what our ancestors passed on us. It's like Tolkien didn't invent this, others didn't invent this, C.S. Lewis, they used and they developed further. That's okay. But it's like this existed centuries, if not millennia, before them, through all of these people throughout the globe. It's fascinating.
Well, and what's really interesting is that you have this word elf, and of course, in Germanic it's like Alf, right? But it's like there's this core idea, and then it gets like differentiated as it travels. But it's like the idea exists and is older than the separation of the groups of people into these areas, where then the later designations came of like where it fits. But so this is like a very ancient idea that goes probably back to a common ancestor of those people, which is crazy. Uh, in contemporary presentation, elves are usually portrayed as jolly creatures, human-like in appearance, but extremely diminutive in size, so they're small, that love teasing humans and playing pranks on them. Of course, there's that right jolly old elf Santa Claus who brings good children toys at Christmas time. Um, the jolly old elf Santa Claus, uh, and his elves. I think that comes from Scandinavia because Frey or Freyr, who is the basically the brother of Freya, who comes from the not the Aesir but the Vanir. They were traded as hostages, and so Freya and her brother Frey, he is the king of the elves, and so he's a Vanir. He's not an elf. Different species. One is a god and one is a spirit. But as the king of the elves, he is designated sometimes as an elf himself, even though he's not. Um, and so I think that's where the whole Santa Claus thing comes from, is the idea of him being an elf king. And I think he joins in the Wild Hunt, which is where he's riding across the sky, and maybe that's how you get to Santa Claus, just by importing some of that imagery. But that's interesting.
I just want to say, because I'm nerding out and enjoying talks about the underworld, and of course, none of this has to be true, but all these underworld races and realms and their kings and their rulers and how they operate, and if they have special powers, and if they're in the main or belong to the elemental spirit of fire or air, or maybe rocks, or maybe wind and air. I mean, anything, water. So I'm thinking about mythological water. What is it pronounced? Styx? Yeah.
Yes, the river Styx that causes amnesia.
And then I'm thinking about Tartarus, and I'm thinking about Greek mythology, and I'm talking about the Old and New Testament. I'm talking about how much we don't know. I'm not saying again any of this is true. I'm just saying how when you put all this together with some Jules Verne, voyage to the underground, and he would depict dinosaurs living there and the whole, ecosystem. If I would remember that, the biggest cave so far found in China that has its own ecosystem and clouds and rains and like animals and forests, like it's deep in the ground. And once when they go there, dude, you can live there. It's like it's big like a town. It's like my mind goes there through science, through mythology, through the scriptures, through the ancient Near East beliefs, through all these folk tales, but also cultural anecdotes and stories that have been passed. And when I put all of this together, it's too fascinating. Makes me wanna just like hobbits. I want to go on adventure. I don't care about Rome. I don't care about Paris. I don't care about this romantic things. Like, send me there on adventure with some band of Christian brothers and sisters so we can go investigate. It's like, I want to go see. I want to investigate. I want to see what is true. I don't know. I want to get some evidence. I want to get some clue. I want to get some goosebumps, and I want some this spiritual adrenaline. That's what drives me to do these episodes with such a high level of adrenaline and excitement, it goes beyond clicks and number of people watching, because it's like my mind just goes anywhere and I'm excited. Like I want to research more. I want to study more. Like, what about these things? And then Tolkien, he didn't pull them out of thin air. Not just him, many others. I'm like, what could be there that God didn't tell us?
So okay, to help you nerd out here. Okay, so you remember in the Norse tale, Balder, right? And how he ended up dying because um Frigga found out, or yeah, Frigga found out that there was a prophecy that Balder was going to die. And so she goes around and asks everything to not harm Balder. And there was only one thing that she didn't ask, and it was mistletoe, because it was, it's a parasitic plant that's growing on a tree, right? And so what could that do? Anyway, so Loki takes the mistletoe and shaves it into a dart, and then uses his blind brother to throw it at him, and it kills him, right? So you have her asking all of the creatures in all of creation, and so like if you look at that, and then you look at the elementals, all right, so kind of have the same idea, but then you go to Greece, right, and you have Achilles, who is dipped by Chiron in the river Styx, and the only place where the water didn't touch him is where he was being held, which was by his heel. And so his Achilles tendon was the only place that he was weak. Okay, so the river Styx is a river that you have to cross to go into death. Now we look at that baptism, right? The water that you have to cross to go into death. Now, in Hades, there was a fiery lake called Acheron, right? This was the lake of this is the same one that is when you go and you watch the Hercules movie, and the souls are swimming around in the lake, and it's kind of on fire, and Hercules has to go down to get his love, Meg, I think is her name, out of the lake. That's that lake. Okay, so in I may be wrong, it may not be intertestamental, it may be Christian apocryphal scriptures, I mean obviously not scriptures but their writings, that in the new age, that the Acheron is called the Crystal Lake. And so there's this idea that even like the fires of Hades will be quenched for the believers in that Acheron. Like there will be a castle, like the kingdom of heaven sits on Acheron. And so like it's this idea of like making all things new. And so the elementals are all being subject to the kingdom of heaven. And then that reminds me of Jesus, where he tells the storm to be still, and the wind obeys him, and the water is still as glass, right? And then like this is a throwaway verse, right? But he says that if I told them to be quiet, even the rocks themselves, right, would sing praises. So he's saying there, the rock, the earth elementals are subject to me, and they themselves would sing the praises of the coming of God in the flesh. I'm just like going through all of these things, and I don't really know what the picture that I'm painting is, but I'm seeing things through this, Greek or medieval mindset, and saying, yeah, obviously this is all Christian. Like it's all been adopted into the Christian worldview. The Christian cosmos has room for all of this.
Man, I hate to. I'm enjoying, but also I'm like, we have to finish the chapter. So it's like a couple of things. When you said that the kingdom of God, in a way, at least symbolically, you're saying will be built on this. Let me try to pronounce it, Ascaron, right? This
Yeah,
lake
Acheron
of
or
fire.
Acheron. Yeah,
So I'm like, well, wait. This is what in Matthew Jesus was saying, that he will build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail. I'm like, boom! It's like here we have just another mythological parallel. Like if the kingdom of heaven will be built on this, that doesn't mean necessarily physically built. Like you'll see fiery, river or lake, and on top of that you'll see, yeah, I don't know, divine castle built on it. The top, the point is that like there's victory because you're going down, you're dying, you're disappearing, and this is what it stays because it's rooted in Christ, and what is down, it's of darkness. But I also want to say you were right. I was checking. It says that when it comes to this river of fire, it says early Jewish apocalyptic literature, for example, in Enoch, it doesn't say if it's first Enoch, second, or third, describes this lake as the Nehar di Nur, which is an actual river of fire that souls must cross or bathe. And it's so funny, in a good way funny, how we can connect this with Greek underworld. We can connect this with Greek mythology. Greek mythology is very old. Greek mythology may not be as old as ancient Near East, but it comes right after them. It's way older than Roman mythology, and it's way older than Norse mythology. So it is old. Greeks are ancient people. So I'm just saying how this is very interesting when we compare scriptures with this book and folk tales and whatever, but also when we compare with mythologies, you're getting this beautiful triangle of so many different sources. And of course, as people with sola scriptura will say, well, first scriptures, and we see and dissect and analyze everything through the Bible, but that doesn't mean we're being fundamentalist and reject any other source of information. We can just approach and say we don't know everything, but it's still so fun to nerd out and analyze all of this. Say, wow, it's like it's a mystery. That's why for me, if someone would offer me, hypothetically, if I would like to explore the bottom of the ocean, the like space, or the underworld, the actual underworld, if it exists with tunnels and stalagmites and whatever, with potential creatures and whatever, I would choose the underworld. Not the underworld that is like Tartarus and you're being tortured, but I mean just to see the afterlife. So for me, that's like, it's very mysterious, and it just draws me to want to explore more.
Yeah, just again, I know we have to continue, but I want to go off of something that you said.
That's okay. Well, we have till midnight.
Right. So Enoch, who's talking about Acheron, that's the Jewish lore, is then using Acheron and bringing it into the Jewish mythos. So you have the Greek concepts that are being imported into Judaism in this kind of intertestamental period. Then it just makes perfect sense that the Christians would then adopt that and say, yeah, actually, they were kind of right on this, and here's why. And then, like I was talking about, I don't know if it was intertestamental or if it was Christian apocryphal literature where they're talking about Acheron becoming a sea of glass. But then I was thinking, God's throne, it's saying that is the sapphire, right? It's the sapphire sea. And then you have rivers of life coming out from under the throne, that the rivers of fire would then become like rivers of glass, which is the living water coming out from under the throne. And it just, to me, that was, there was some piece of that was like, well, but wait a minute. I think there's a belief in Orthodoxy that the lake of fire and the rivers of living water are one and the same, that it's your the way that you're oriented to God is what you experience in his presence, that it can either be the lake of fire or it could be the rivers of living water, depending on if you're still in your sin or not. Which is it's just interesting. And we're all talking about, these speculative and making these connections, right? And none of this is like in the scripture, so we're not making any dogmatic claim. But I'm just trying to see the vision that the Middle Ages Christian would have seen, or the medieval Christian would have seen, looking at these things. Like, how were they piecing this together? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, is we're trying to reconnect our Christian worldview to the more holistic understanding of the cosmos.
Dude, I have to admit, this is the nerdiest and most exciting episode we did on Fridays in many months. That doesn't mean other episodes are less quality or something, but they weren't like this. And I'm like, we don't even have the outline for tonight. This just comes from like pure imagination. And of course, because we pray before every podcast, I hope some of this comes by the Holy Spirit. I also checked just to make sure that we're speaking truth. So it is in both First Enoch chapter 17 and in Second Enoch chapter 10, where it talks about a river of fire. But it's interesting because it talks about different fires. In First Enoch 17, Enoch is guided to the ends of the earth, where he witnesses a river of fire in which the fire flows like water before it discharges into the great western sea. In Second Enoch 10, Heavenly guides show Enoch the third heaven, describing a terrifying place of darkness and a fiery river prepared as eternal punishment for the wicked. So I think even though same terminology is used, I don't think these rivers are same. But it's just interesting how, just like you said, we can compare this with some of mythologies. Okay, let's switch briefly to fairies and fays, and then we'll go to something else. Traditionally, the fairies are a race of beings, the counterparts of humankind in physical appearances, but at the same time, non-physical or multi-dimensional. They're mortal, but lead longer lives than their human cousins. Years ago, I was sternly advised that if I should ever have an encounter with a fairy and wish to survive basically intact, there are two rules I must remember. Don't you dare ask its name. Don't you dare call it a fairy. According to those who speak the Gaelic tongue of Scotland and Ireland, the wee folk prefer to be known as scythe. I think that's how it's pronounced. There's a disagreement as to the exact meaning of this word. Some say it refers to the mounds or hells in which the supernatural folk abide. Others say that it means the people of peace. I don't think they're peaceful, and that is how the scythe generally behave towards humans. I'm going to skip a huge, several chapters, and I'm going to go about UFOs. In most traditions, especially in the British Isles and Scandinavia, the fairy folk were supernatural entities that inhabit a magical kingdom beneath the surface of the earth. In all traditions, the fairy folk are depicted as possessing many more powers and abilities than Homo sapiens. But for some unexplained reason, they're strongly dependent on human beings. And from time to time, they seek to reinforce their own kind by kidnapping both children and adults. Tales of folk being abducted by smallish beings did not begin in the last few decades with accounts of the Greys from UFOs. That's a very good point I wanted to mention, and I'll skip to the end of this subchapter. C.S. Lewis, author of many classic books on spiritual matters, once suggested that the wee folk are a third rational species. He mentioned three of them, three possibilities. The first one, the angels are highest, having perfect goodness and whatever knowledge is necessary for them to accomplish God's will. The second one will be humans, somewhat less perfect, way less perfect, and they're in the second tier. And the third one would be fairies, having certain powers of the angels, but no souls. These are in the third category. On the other hand, medieval theologians favored three quite different theories to explain the origin of fairies. And this will be: one, they're a special class of demoted angels; two, they're a special class of the dead; three, they're fallen angels. So I would not put C.S. Lewis against medieval theologians, but I would say that, at least for me, and Shaun may disagree, I like more how medieval theologians put this together, these three different categories, because they're closely and in a more precise or better way describing what fairies could be. For the life of me, I did not hear good things about fairies that I can remember. I'm not counting those fairy tales. When we heard about kids, they're all like wonderful. They help people. They bless you. They come with magic wands. No, I'm talking about people who supposedly, like Reverend Kirk, witnessed them and how they felt, scared, and how they shapeshifted and whatever. So if we would dissect fairies and their ontology, when it comes to these three types that medieval theologians saw them as a special class of demoted angels, I would say possibly. Number two, special class of the dead. I would say, at least to me, possibly not, or probably not. And the third, they're fallen angels. So I would say it's either one or three. What would be your thoughts?
My thoughts are in Enoch. So again, going right back to the dude, our fundamentalist, like, Bible alone guys who are like, you can't have an opinion that doesn't come from the Bible.
They'll cancel us tonight.
Yeah.
We're being canceled.
Yeah, St. Sean's getting canceled tonight. So it says that those angels who disobeyed, they were going to be taken in and thrown into Tartarus, right? And so, but they said, well, God, if you do that and you throw us into Tartarus, what about the things that you gave us, like, dominion over? How is salvation ever going to work if, like, the stuff that you gave us doesn't work? And so God's like, you know what? so I think he took like 1/10 or 1/40th of the angels, and he threw them to earth, and where they hit, they took on the form of whatever would be like best to work there. So that's where Enoch says that's where you get your dryads and your naiads and all these the creatures who like dwell in the forest. These are the angels that disobeyed, and then in order to continue to fulfill their purpose, they were cast to earth. uh, I think that would be your fairies. Uh, they are probably more on the demonic side because they're a fallen angel. They know that their time is coming, um, but yet they still have the authority that they were given to control the things that they had. That's why, every story that you hear about fairies, they have certain powers, right? To shapeshift, or certain powers to do. I mean, even the idea of a changeling where they take out the child and replace it with a fairy who then grows up and kills their whole family. Uh, that like there's certain supernatural powers there. Um, Also, for the literature that I was talking about that describes Atron being turned into glass, that is the Apocalypse of Peter. So it is Christian pseudepigrapha. Um, and the idea is that the damned will be thrown into the lake of fire, but the lake of fire is going to be like a second baptism that washes away all their sins, which is why it's not in the Bible, but it's still piecing that together with, hey, what were they thinking about things at the time? So, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Do you want to go to gnomes, please? And then I can go quickly with goblins and gremlins. And after that, we just have leshy, trolls, and something like that. So I think we can finish within 2 hours. We have 30 more minutes. So I think we're good.
All right. Whoever started the image of cute, pointed hat garden gnomes must have been quite possessed by the greedy spirit of a gnome that came up with a plan to squeeze coins out of humans. Traditionally, gnomes were represented as gnarled, wrinkled, hunched old men who have been assigned to guard some ancient treasure. Classically, the role of the gnome is that of a supernatural guardian that can release the treasures of the earth to the earnest alchemist or magician. Gnomes, according to the alchemist of the Renaissance, had the ability to move through the earth in a manner similar to a human moving through air or a fish through water. The alchemists would seek to invoke the energy of the salamander, a lizard like entity whose element was fire, and the gnome, whose element was earth, and combine their energies with air and water to create gold from the base metals. So, gnomes, not pointy headed creatures. Um, like it says, a fish is to water as a gnome is to earth, and they like money. So, there's that.
So I think this will work well with dragons. I mean, they would either kill each other or they were like, hey, let's at least protect the gold. And after protecting the gold against anyone who want to invade, let's then see if we want to split among each other. But I think this is type of like dragon like being not physically, but at least in their spirit, this is like their role, or they're greedy. They want to protect the gold. They want to just have it for themselves. But dragons do not have this ability to appear and disappear like shapeshifters and go to the underworld and just appear in our realm at will. So I see similarities, but also see differences.
So, in Norse mythology, now that you say that, Fafnir is the greedy dragon, and he was transformation. He was originally a dwarf son of Raidmar, and brother of Regan, Otter, and I'm not even gonna try to say that. But so the idea of the dragon being like a greedy hoarder, kind of thing, that actually comes from the idea of the dwarf, which is the creature that lives underground in Norse mythology. So the idea that you, or the way that you connected that, is exactly what they were thinking, in Scandinavia 1,000 years ago.
Man, who would have said that I said something true, right? Okay, let's switch quickly to goblins. Sadly, there are only a couple of sentences about goblins, and then gremlins. So goblins are very closely related to demonic entities. Their specialties wreaking havoc and malicious acts of harm, usually portrayed as small, grotesque beings. The basic nature of goblins is as foul as their appearance. This is pretty much straightforward, so we don't have to add unless you have something cool. Okay, gremlins. Although gremlins may see a recent addition to the folklore and of the wee folk, it would seem that their antecedents are the goblins of old. The term gremlin was derived from the Old English word griem, which means to vex and annoy. And that is certainly what the gremlins did to the pilots and their aircraft in World War II. And I remember this from movies and from also cartoons with Bugs Bunny, right? Like this was in one of the cartoons. This was the topic, the plot. When the pesky entities were routinely blamed for engine troubles, electronic failures, another spiritual um, uh, if I will say a detail or showing that there is something malicious happening, because usually spiritual entities they feed on electronics, so they drain batteries so fast and everything breaks around them. So they were routinely blamed for engine troubles, electronic failures, and any other thing that might go wrong with an airplane. According to airmen who swore that they had survived close encounters with the mischief makers, the gremlins dressed in red or green double breasted frock coats, old fashioned tricorn hats with a feather, tights, and pointed footwear. Wow, that's a weird fashion. They need a new fashion designer. Whoever is advising them how to dress, they need a new person. Some of the gremlins love to suck the high octane gas out of tanks. Other messed with the landing gears, and still others specialized in jamming the radio frequencies. Just as the pilots and mechanics were learning to tolerate the gremlin crowd, it wasn't long before they also began to be annoyed by the gremlins' girlfriends, the Finellas, nicknamed the Widgets. Okay, never heard about their girlfriends, the Widgets. But I want to say something. So we were sweet. First, we began with these elementals from the water, like the merman and the mermaids. Then we switched to the forest, then to the underground, right? Fire and stuff like that. Now we're going to the air, at least in this subsection when we're talking about gremlins, which is cool because the whole chapter is very deeply filled with information that we can correlate with Apocrypha, with the Bible, with folk tales, with cultures and things of that sort. One thing, how come there are no modern day eyewitness reports about gremlins? Of course, if these entities exist, would it be the type of engines and planes we have developed in modernity compared to like 50 and 100 years ago? I don't know what would change, but like you don't hear modern day accounts about gremlins. This is all like 20th century or before. What do you think about this?
Well, first of all, do you remember the blonde lady who was on the airplane and pointed and said, "I don't know who that is, but that MFer isn't real"? Okay,
Oh
maybe.
my gosh, this was few years ago, several
Yeah,
years ago. I remember
yeah.
seeing that weird video. We were all thinking, is that lady high, or she was seeing something on a plane that no one else saw? I
Yeah.
remember that video. Let
Okay.
me let me try to find it and you talk.
Yeah, okay. And then secondly, um, there's a phenomenon that happens that's called fairy fire. It's not the formal name, but another name for it that people will probably be more familiar with is St. Elmo's fire. And what happens is as the plane is flying through the air, it picks up static charge, and then it creates like this blue corona around the nose and the wings, and it has electrical discharge, and so it'll cause like these sparks, like lightning, and it can interfere with more primitive electronic sensors. Now, obviously they're grounding the planes in such a way that it doesn't mess with any of the avionics, but it used to be quite a problem. And maybe this could have been what the gremlins were uh, what should I say? What the Gremlins were accused of doing, or vice versa. Maybe there's something fairy that's going on with the static charges, and that's why they call it fairy fire. Who knows? Have you found the clip yet?
I did, and I do apologize for all the Christians watching there because the first 5 seconds have cuss words, but I can't cut it. It's a very short video, so I'm just asking for grace. If you're very sensitive, don't watch the next 5-10 seconds. But yes, this is the video. So I just gave you a friendly warning. She's gonna cuss a little bit. So this is the video. 11 million views. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool.
That back there is not real. And you can sit on this plane and you can die with them or not. I'm not going to. That
So someone was editing this video, but the point is that when she was showing where the place on on a plane where she saw something or someone, everyone else was like, we don't see anything. Now, was she spiritually awoken in a way, like, and I'm very careful with that word woke, how nowadays is used and abused with politics. So did she see something that really wasn't there, or was she like on something like high? I don't know. But the point is, like, that made me think of what you said about Gremlins. Like, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, to me, in aviation, that's one of the things. Another thing could possibly be how many of the U or how much of the UFO footage that we see is picked up in airplanes. And could it be that there is some sort of, I mean, we know it's an interdimensional phenomenon, what's happening with the UFOs, because they've said as much, that this is not interplanetary as much as interdimensional. So who's to say this isn't what they were calling gremlins? That it's not necessarily a critter so much as it is a spiritual phenomenon that's happening, and it tends to be more impacting our aircraft. So maybe a more archaic word for what do they call it now? UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, would be gremlin.
Yeah, and PJ saying far. Is that, I don't know if that's a mistake, but basically he was talking about orbs. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's called St. Elmo's fire, but the what is it, unofficial term that the aviators will use is fairy fire. So yeah, it can manifest as orbs. It's static discharge. So you could imagine, static discharge coming off of the nose cones or off of the wing tips as orbs.
Thank you. Can you please skip a few pages down and go to the leprechaun? And then I'll deal with Leshy because he's coming from Slavic mythology. And then I'll also cover very shortly Rusalki because they're also coming from my part of the globe. And we can call it a night. Oh, and trolls. I'll leave you trolls. Okay.
Okay, before I do Leprechaun, I'm doing Kitsune because we are not going to get canceled by our anime people. So I will
Okay.
do the fox demon. In Japanese folklore, the kitsune is a magical being that most often appears as a fox. When it is around 100 years old, the kitsune can manifest in human form, most often that of a beautiful girl. Well known as tricksters, the kitsune can appear as a lovely, seductive girl one moment and lure a lusty young man into a cave where it shapeshifts into the image of an old man. The kitsune are master illusionists and are generally good natured. If one incurs its wrath, however, it can manipulate time and space and drive people insane. Wow, that last portion there makes it sound Lovecraftian. But yeah, I mean, shape-shifting demon that makes people fall in love. Yeah, we just covered that in Mermaids, but yeah, the nine-tailed fox demon that appears as a beautiful young girl explains most anime. All right, so now we're moving on to Leprechaun. The classic tale of the leprechaun is that of the Irishman catching one of these wee folk and demanding to be given the little fellow's crock of gold. In these stories, the sly leprechaun always manages to trick the greedy lout who has grabbed him by causing the human to glance away from him for even a moment. Once the human takes his eyes off the leprechaun, he has somehow managed to he has somehow managed to glimpse in the first place. I can read, I promise. Um, Once a human takes his eyes off the leprechaun he has somehow managed to glimpse in the first place, the wee one has the power to vanish in a flash. The leprechaun, dressed in his bright green clothing with a red cap and a leather apron, was originally known as a cheerful cobbler, a wee person who takes delight in repairing human shoes for a reward of a bowl of porridge. I thought that was elves. Didn't they make a little cartoon about the cobbler's elves? In fact, isn't that why they call it the Keebler elves? Because cobbler? But anyway, so the country folk of Ireland know better than to disturb the mounds or raths in which the leprechaun dwell. Those who would wantonly violate their domicile is to invite severe supernatural consequences upon oneself. So again, the hills or the barrows are the place where these little tiny things dwell, and it reminds me a lot of a gnome because it can just disappear into the ground. The trouble at the rath outside of the village of Wexford began on a morning in 1960, when the workmen from the State Electricity Board began digging a hole for the erection of a light pole within the parameters of the Rath, the villagers warned the workmen that the pole would never stay put because no self respecting community of wee folk could abide a disturbance in their mound. The big city electrical workmen had a laugh at the expense of the villagers and said some uncomplimentary things about their level of intelligence. They finished digging the hole to the depth that experience had taught them was adequate. Then they placed the post within the freshly dug opening and tamped the black earth firmly around the base. The satisfied foreman pronounced for all within earshot to hear that no fairy folk or leprechaun would move the pole from where it had been anchored. However, the next morning the pole tilted at a sharp angle in loose earth. The foreman of the crew voiced his suspicions that the leprechauns had received some help from the humans bent on mischief. Glaring his resentment at any villagers who would meet his accusative eyes, the foreman ordered his men to reset the pole. The next morning, that one particular pole was once again conspicuous in the long line of newly placed electric poles or posts by its weird tilt in the loose earth at its base, whilst the other poles in the line stood straight and firmly upright. That one woebegone post was tilted askew. The foreman had endured enough of such rustic humor at his expense. He ordered the crew to dig a hole 6 feet wide, place the pole precisely in the middle, and pack the earth so firmly around the base that nothing short of a bomb could budge it. The next morning, the intrusive pole had once again been pushed loose of the little people's wrath. The foreman and his crew from the electricity board finally knew when they were licked. Without another word to the grinning villagers, the workmen dug a second hole 4 feet outside of the mound and dropped the pole in there. And that was where it stood, as solid as the Emerald Isle for many years to come. So basically, they didn't want the pole in their house, and they said, nah, not going to happen. Not in my house.
Not on my watch. Okay, let's talk about Leshy. The reason why I won't say I like, but when I first encountered Leshy was in The Witcher 3 gaming, and this was like an entity that is in the forest protecting, forest. That would be like grotesque and huge and very dangerous. And then you, as the role of the Witcher, Geralt, you'll go and fight. You can't just kill him in like 10, 15 seconds. So that's whenever I hear of that entity Leshy, I'm always thinking of The Witcher 3, which is of course coming from Polish gaming studio. So that's same thing Eastern Europe. So the Leshy in Slavic folklore is a large male woodland spirit that is recognized as the protector of wild animals and the forest itself. Woe be unto any careless camper, reckless hunter, or even a smitten lover who carves his initials with his sweetheart into the bark of a tree. The Leshy most often appears as a tall man with pale skin, bright green eyes, a long beard, horns, and hooves. He's capable of shape-shifting, another similarity among all these creatures. And because of his close association with wolves, I didn't know this, he's sometimes believed to be a werewolf. Although he has a ghastly cry that terrorizes those who abuse the forest and its creatures, he can also imitate human voices. Since he can sometimes be a fit of a prankster, he will sometimes lure people deep into the forest until they're lost. Generally, the Leshy is not an evil being, so he will see to it that he confused humans find their way out again. So here he's not as bad as portrayed in some video games. I think I've seen a Leshy image in one of the horror movies that came out a few years ago, and of course, I'm trying to find the title of the movie, but I think because I watched so much, I don't know if I can remember the title.
So it seems to
That's
me that Leshy is what the Western Europeans would call the Green Man, or maybe what the image is very similar to what the Native Americans would call a Wendigo.
that's actually a good point. Yeah, and in this movie, and again, and I know I'll remember, I'll find it once when we're done with podcast, and that makes me upset. This is a North American movie. I don't know if it's American or Canadian, and it's not called Leshy. But basically, some friends go camping in the forest, and many of them die. And one guy, I think only one guy survives, and he's put in a sort of a cabin, and this huge entity that has hooves and is really huge, has all these horns and stuff, is just like nailing humans and just rising them up. And these people who are there are kind of worshiping in a cult this entity, and that's why the entity doesn't touch these people, but that's why everyone else is caught and like sacrificed or whatever. But this guy manages by the end of the movie to escape, and then the sun is rising and the forest is disappearing, and then they're just like a valley on a mountain or something. And then you can see Leshy, or type of entity that reminds me of Leshy, is like angry by the edge of the forest, cannot pass the forest because it is a forest demon, a forest creature, forest entity. And I'm like, man, this like perfectly resembles what we are reading now. But of course, I can't find the movie. I know I watched it, and it was a very decent B horror movie. I thought the title of the movie was Cult, but it's not Cult. So yeah, sorry for that. Can't find it.
Do you remember the Spanish movie Pan's Labyrinth?
So I did watch it, but I watched it like long ago, so I don't remember a lot. I know it had to do with war, and then one part was like fantasy with that creature in the labyrinth, right?
Yeah, the Pan creature, the horned creature, kind of also reminds me of a Leshy because it's like made of wood and bark and really tall and gangly. But yeah, I mean that's kind of what I thought of when I was thinking of, oh, what kind of character would have those attributes in somewhat modern pop culture. And of course, like you said, it came out like 20 years ago. But yeah, that's a critter that I thought of.
I found the movie. Sorry, that's why I wasn't active, because I was googling. The film is called The Ritual. Let me just share the screen. I don't know if we have time to play the trailer, but it's a cool movie, so I can recommend to people, even though I spoiled it and said what is it about. So Ritual came out 2017. It's a horror mystery, only hour and a half. Got very good for a big production movie. Very good reviews on IMDb, 6.4. And it says a group of old college friends reunite for a trip to a most dangerous country in Europe, Sweden, encountering a menacing presence there stalking them. So I would recommend the movie. And it's dealing, you can see here, let me see images. You can tell it does deal with an entity like this, right? You can pretty much tell.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So it's a good movie. Yeah, PJ says The Ritual. Yeah, PJ. Okay, let me also deal with the last one, and then you'll do trolls, and we'll be done. And the reason why I wanted to deal with this one is because this is also part of my Slavic tradition. So when it comes to Rusalki, in the legends of the Slavic people, we find that the spirit of a beautiful girl who used her beautiful, physical charms to work wickedness and consequently has been damned for her sins gets another chance to be even nastier when she crosses over to the other side. It is at that time that she may choose to become a Rusalka, which is singular, a sultry shapeshifter who can appear along the riverbanks as an innocent young maiden, singing sweet, seductive songs to smitten young men before she drowns them. So something very similar to sirens, to mermen and mermaids. Some rusalki, which is plural, are a bit nicer to their victims. They first make love to the men they've seduced and permit them to die happy before they pull them into the water and drown them. So that's a bit nicer. So I'll give you satisfaction, but I'm still gonna drown you and kill you after like that experience. It's like, if that's a bit nicer, I don't want to deal with any of them. In Bulgaria, the rusalki, known as samovili, are made up of the souls of unbaptized baby girls or of brides who died on their wedding night. That's sad. So they're made up of souls of unbaptized baby girls or of brides who died on their wedding night. They too get another opportunity to manifest as tempting shapeshifters who lure men to their watery deaths. I think this is very self-explanatory. Can you please read briefly Troll, and we'll be done for tonight?
I just wanted to say about the Rusalka. There is a creature in Mexican lore known as La Llorona, and she is I think she's a maiden who either died on her wedding night or she lost her children and is looking for her children, and so she lures people and then drowns them. So I mean that's a very similar kind of thing. Okay, so troll. All right, forget about those cute, light, bright-eyed munchkins with red hair that claim to be trolls. In Scandinavia, the term troll is applied only to hostile giants. By the time of the Middle Ages, some trolls had become a bit smarter and more fiendish, capable of working black magic and sorcery. In more contemporary times, the troll is regarded as a denizen of the mountain caves, larger than average humans and exceedingly ugly. Somewhere along the way, some modern Danes started considering the sweet, elf like, or brownie type being as a kind of troll, especially for export. Just don't go around the mountainous regions of Scandinavia and shout out any challenges to the trolls. The ugly brute that comes charging out of the cave will bear absolutely no resemblance to that little smiling red-haired doll your parents bought you when you were a kid. Um, and is it Washington or Oregon that also has trolls? They even have like statues of trolls.
I never heard of that. Seriously?
No?
There were like
Yeah,
reports of trolls in North America?
yeah, yeah. Let me look it up real quick.
I would just say while
Let's
you're looking that it's interesting how trolls is not a general term for all the giants, but only of specific type of giants, like the nasty ones, the evil ones, the wicked ones. So it's like, oh, so in their mythology and in their history and culture, not all giants will be evil, but those who are, they're called trolls. I'm like, oh, it's interesting.
uh uh let's see here. So it's in both Washington and Oregon, where
Hmm.
have um they have trolls. There are wooden effigies that are created for the trolls. There are bridges that have sculptures of trolls in them. So yeah, it's both. It's just the Pacific Northwest that have the trolls. I wonder if it's because they had Scandinavian settlers who brought their idea of trolls with them. Interestingly, and you probably remember this, was it Iceland? or Sweden, that they actually rerouted a highway because it was going through elf territory. So like the yeah, the Department of Roads rerouted a highway to go around elf territory. Let me
What?
see. Yeah,
What? When was this? Like in the 20th century?
yeah. No, like 21st century.
Man, that's recent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
So,
don't know that. But I
but
know that I watched Troll Hunter movie and also Troll 1 and 2. The both all three movies were made by the Scandinavians, and I loved all the movies.
Iceland is famous for delaying, altering, and outright rerouting road construction projects to avoid disturbing the territory of elves. It was 2013, so it was just 12 years ago or 13 years ago, um,
Hmm.
on the Alftanes Peninsula near Reykjavik, and so they had delayed it, and then they eventually just rerouted the highway to go around the Elven territory. Yeah, so. I mean, this is it's not just myths to these people, who actually lived near them.
But wait, what made you connect elves with our subtopic of trolls?
So the fact that it was Scandinavians that
Okay.
were moving to the Pacific Northwest and they brought their troll idea with them, and then I was like, and then the fact that it said that they have sculptured bridges with trolls underneath them, and then the bridge troll, and then okay, well, trolls on a road, and then okay, so a highway. Wait, there was a highway that was rerouted for the elves. Was that Sweden or was it Iceland? And I couldn't remember. So that's how my brain worked, was just connecting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just have like Wikipedia links in my brain.
I know. Okay, well, we made it in 2 hours, even though we spent almost an hour just on the introduction and the first subchapter. We did in the rest of the 60 minutes we covered all the other entities, and I had so much fun that I didn't have in months. I just want to say one thing and I'll let you do the brief conclusion and we'll be done. This Sunday, so in 2 days, 7 p.m. Central Time, my guest will be a missionary to Pakistan, so he has many cool stories to tell us, spiritual warfare, tell us about our friends in Pakistan who are Muslims and Hindus, how they treat Christians, the Christian underworld church, healings, testimonies of that sort. So make sure to subscribe, to join us again in a little bit less than 48 hours. This will be with our new friend on the podcast, Ben. Shaun, any concluding thoughts regarding this whole topic of gnomes and trolls and mermaids and gremlins, especially for Christians? Are these just foolish child stories, or there could be something more spiritually sinister that is true, especially through biblical lenses?
Yeah, I would be careful about just dismissing as superstition something that is the experience of so many people. As you said, the Rusalka in Slavic lands, and then you have completely disconnected from that the same La Llorona in Mexico, southern Texas, and Latin America, and so these are very real experiences to these people that are not just maybe not always beneficial, but they're a reality. And so you could just classify them all as demonic, and maybe rightly so. But even if they're not, even I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. Yes, I also am a little
It's one
stitious.
of the best sayings ever. So I'm sorry, just had the same way you said your brain works like WikiLeaks. I'm like, this is how my brain works. So please continue.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you may rightly so just dismiss it all as demonic and say, okay, well, it's all demons, and fair point. But maybe it's not all demonic, and so if there are these encounters that people have with some of these creatures that are seemingly beneficent, then how do you account for that? Maybe you could say, well, they were just luring them in and wanted to build up their trust so that they could misguide them, and yeah, that could be a point. But how did Christians historically approach these things? And I think it's important for us to develop a robust worldview as Christians, because the supernatural is increasing. People are noticing it more, right? And it's being taken more seriously. And so people are going to have questions. They're going to have experiences, and the internet connects us. So these experiences are no longer isolated. Someone has an experience with something, and now they have iPhones in their pocket. They can capture a picture. And so you might have these blurry pictures of something that seems to be uh, something substantial. And then what do you do with it? You know, as a Christian, I mean, people are going to get tired of hearing, oh, it's demons, right? Like, yeah, well, you said this thing was demons, but now here's this other unrelated thing, and you also say it's demons. I mean, historically, people have had a more robust worldview, and those people were Christians. So we don't have to be afraid of it. We have room for it. We can categorize it. And it may end up all being just different varieties of demons. But to just go straight to demons feels dismissive to the people who have had an experience, right? Like that, I know what the demon is. I've seen The Exorcist. This wasn't that. Um, and so I think that we don't need to be afraid to make room for these things while at the same time saying Christ has conquered all of these things. And so if you're someone who's not a Christian, I would say that Christ has conquered your false gods, and they are afraid of my God. So there's that. What you need to do is repent and put your faith in Christ, because at the end of the day, your gods will bow to my God. And so I would just invite you to do what has been the greatest pagan tradition of all time, which is convert to Christianity. Um, my ancestors did it. Nico's ancestors did it.
I saw that meme. I saw that meme a week or 2 weeks ago. It says, "Oh, you want to follow paganism, something like that, pagan or tradition?" Well, the biggest tradition of them is converting to Christianity.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, our ancestors were based because they converted to Christianity. They stopped worshiping forest demons. So, do likewise.
Thank you so much for that message, Shaun. Thank you, PJ. Thank you, everyone, for being, with us for this couple 2 hours. I most honestly really enjoyed. We'll see you again this Sunday evening with a missionary to Pakistan, our new friend on the podcast. If you didn't subscribe, and I hope these fantastic Friday episodes find you entertained, but also that they serve as an educational tool and that bridge again between the scriptures, apocrypha, to mythology, to people's, stories, legends, cultural anecdotes, and things that people pass from generation to generation. So we are trying always on the podcast to talk about fun and interesting and fringe and supernatural and educational topics, always pointing people to Christ. And that's the majesty of this channel. May God bless you. Be encouraged. God also bless you, Shaun, you, PJ, everyone else. And again, see you in less than 2 days. Take care.